Thanks for tuning into No Wine in No Time. I'm your host Dave, and today we're going to dive into the fascinating world of wine and food pairings, one of my favorite subjects. So the old standard in the wine world says that if we're having fish, we have a white wine, and if we're having meat, we have a red wine. Well, on a very basic level, you'll never go wrong if you follow that simple rule. But it's a bit more complex than that. So let's start to talk about the differences between different types of fishes and different types of meats. So fish at first, let's think about the fish world. We have very neutral fishes, things like trout, tilapia, sea bass, cod. Then we have more pungent type of fishes, ones full of flavor and oil, things like swordfish and also salmon. And the wines that pair with those different fishes differ based on how complex the flavors of the fish themselves are. So if we think about anything we would squeeze a lemon on, for example, then I like to pair that with a lighter white wine. Things like Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Grigio. When we start to have fish that maybe would have some sort of creamy sauce on it, then I like to pair it with heavier, more muscular whites. Things like Chardonnay, Viognier. And you could even take and pair a rosé with some of these type of heavier fishes. I love salmon with a nice, crisp, dry rosé. It works perfectly. So, that explains fishes a little bit. Now let's talk about meats. So meat could be anything from delicate meats like fowl, chicken, turkey, things of that nature, all the way up to heavier meats like beef and a lot of different wild game. So when we think about pairing red wines with meat, the one thing that you need to understand is that the more tannic the wine is, in other words, those things that kind of make your cheeks feel dry and your tongue feel a little bit furry, those are tannins. Tannins are a sensation, not necessarily a flavor. So a wine that has a more heavy tannic structure, those wines pair better with protein and fats. So when we think about light meats, things like chicken, turkey, those pair a little better with rosés or very light wines, things like a Beaujolais made from Gamay grapes, or even a very light Pinot Noir. But as we start to ascend and we start to get into the pork family and then start to move into beef, we start to look at the weight of the wine and the tannins of the wine. So just like fish, when we talk about the more stronger flavored fish, we use a heavier type of wine. The same rule applies to reds and meats. As the meat itself starts to gain in fat content, so let's think a ribeye steak as opposed to a filet mignon. When we look at ribeye, it's a very fatty meat, prime rib, for example. We want a heavier, more tannic wine, and that will pair better with that particular dish. So, there also is something that I like to call the divine plan, and it lives by the saying that I use endlessly in talking about wine and food pairings, and that is, if it grows together, it goes together. So, when we take and move our wine from white with fish, red with meat, then we start to think about the complexity of the fish and the complexity of the meat. Now we can take that 101 type of knowledge a step even further and start to talk about regional diversity. So if it grows together, it goes together. And if you live by that rule, you'll be right on your wine and food pairings 90% of the time, if not 100% of the time. And what I always like to use as a great example of incredible regional diversity, not only in food, but also in wine, is the country of Italy. Italy, from north to south, east to west, the dishes change, the cuisine changes, but also based on the climate, those wines change tremendously. So I have 6 examples here that I'd like to talk about. So when we look at these 2 wines, these 2 here on your right-hand side, these are from northern Italy. One's an Amarone della Valpolicella and the other is a Barolo. So one's from the Veneto region, one's from the Piedmont region. So the two kind of ears at the top of Italy. So these wines are very muscular, very robust, and quite heavy in tannins. And if you think about what's the cuisine like in that particular area, a lot of long roasted meats. Think things like ossobuco, think things like stews, very hearty type, comfort type foods. And those type of wines pair beautifully with those type of meals. But not everything in the north is heavy food. So when we start to think about lighter fare up in the northern part of Italy, I gravitate toward things like, this is a Gavi. So agave made 100% from Cortese grapes, a white wine from the northern part of Italy in the province of Piedmont. And it's perfect with lighter fare like the ones they have in northern Italy. Now as we start to make our way down south, we get to central Italy, and a wine like a Brunello di Montalcino pairs beautifully with things like grilled meats, things that are cooked over an open fire. And if you look at some of the cuisine of Tuscany, a lot of these grilled meats are very, very present in their day-to-day dishes, and something like a Brunello di Montalcino would pair perfectly with a grilled meat. As we start to head a little bit further south, we get into, let's say, the pasta area of Italy. Now granted, you go to Italy, you can have pasta in any part of Italy, north, south, east, or west. But if we think about tomatoes and pasta, that's kind of a more southern Italy thing. So think about different ways you can prepare pasta. So let's think about pasta with maybe olive oil, basil, maybe fresh tomatoes, and a little bit of seafood. Now you think about one of the whites from Campania, like a Fiano d'Avellino. That's a perfect wine that pairs beautifully with that type of dish. Then let's think about pasta with a red sauce. Then we start to think about something like this little gem from Puglia. This is a Salice Salentino using the grapes Negro Amaro, Primitivo, and Malvasia Nero. So once again, if it grows together, it goes together. So you can take your wine knowledge to the next level by looking at regional foods and regional wine pairings. I just used Italy as an example, but this really works anywhere around the world. So if it grows together, it goes together. So really one of the most pleasurable things in the entire world is a perfectly paired meal. And hopefully you can take some of this knowledge and what you learned today to make your next meal extra special. So that's all the time we have for today. Please tune in next time, and soon you'll know wine in no time.